Hello, and welcome to the Content Advantage, a talk show about content for content professionals. I'm Scott Abel. Thanks for joining me. This is my co-host, Megan Gilhooly.
Hey, Scott, how are you doing?
Great. Thanks for being here again today.
Yeah, good to see you. So we both know the field of technical communication has seen many big changes over the past decade. We've adopted new ways of creating, maintaining, updating, controlling, delivering information that we develop. Technological innovations are driving the need for many of these changes and making it a necessity that we adjust our approaches. We want to examine our biases, rethink the way we work. I talk about this all the time. And so today we've invited Rob Gillespie to talk to us about what he thinks the future of technical communication will look like and what we can do to prepare for it. So Rob, thanks so much for joining us. It's good to see you.
Oh, thank you, Megan. Thank you, Scott, for inviting me, and I'm definitely looking forward to this conversation.
Excellent. Super. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're so passionate about the future of technical communication?
Yeah, certainly. I've been involved in tech comms for over 10 years. I started in a sort of traditional world of telco, I suppose the sort of classic product documentation of old. And I was fortunate I started to move into cloud, platform as a service, DevOps as a service, and I sort of try to sort of keep at the cusp of what's changing. And for me, it's a great privilege because I write every day, but most importantly, I learn every day. And I think the thing I've learned most is that everything I learned yesterday is probably going to be wrong tomorrow.
That's so true. So true.
I'm sure that was a lesson our parents tried to teach us in some way or another, but as we were younger, we probably didn't learn those lessons.
Them. Yeah.
But at least we're here to share them. So let me tell the audience members who are just joining us a few things about the platform. If you've not participated in a Bright Talk webinar today, this show is actually a talk show, so there will be no slides. It'll just be us on camera having a conversation with our guest. We won't be using any kind of trickery, so you don't have to worry about whether we can see you or hear you because we don't have access to your camera or microphone, so that's really good. So if you're the pants off generation or I didn't do my hair, it's okay today. You can ask a question at any time by using the Ask a Question tab located in your webinar viewing panel. You'll click on the tab and text us a question. We can't text you an answer directly back to you, but we'll know that you've asked a question. The only thing we won't know is your name. So if you'd like us to know who asked the question, append it with your name so we'll know who asked it. And we'll be able to address you during the time remaining. You can also access additional content in the webinar viewing panel. There's a place called Attachments and Links that allows us to give you documents. So you've got access to some frequently asked questions in case you've got some troubleshooting with Bright Talk. There's also information about the presenter, including a link to the article that triggered this interview. His article, Rob's article, is called A Story of Discontent, A Writer's Tale, which was a blog post in LinkedIn Pulse. You'll want to check that out after the show or during the show whenever you get a chance, just by clicking the Attachments and Links section. And by the way, today's show is brought to you by Zoom In Software. There's some great information and some blog posts available in the Attachments and Links section from our sponsor as well. All right, so we promised the audience, Rob, one particular thing, that we would talk about the future of technical communication, including the impact that the changes that you alluded to just a moment ago have had on the industry and will continue to have as we move forward. So let's dive right in. You wrote about the need to reimagine how we work and kind of how we create technical communication in this world that's changing so quickly. And you also made a point of saying that we're being faced with 1,000 or million budget cuts, like they're just coming at us, all over the place. And so in order to prepare for the future, we need to be able to address those challenges. So what did you mean when you were saying that we're experiencing all these challenges?
The list of potential challenges is extremely long, and I will cover a few small ones in relatively small detail now, but these are challenges that are mainly in the software industry at the moment, and that's where I come from, but these are things that will apply to everybody in every sector. It's sort of the software-defined world that we will soon live in. So certain challenges that we're confronting now in software will apply to everybody in almost every industry that survives in the future. So we have things like, developer-created content. So this is a sort of collaborative idea that we have lots of participants in content creation, and we need to be able to manage that and encourage that because it's extremely important in developing useful content. Then we have this idea of automation. So we're trying to introduce as much automation into the process of creating content as possible. So this may be the the sort of traditional tools that are used in software, but it can also be sort of bespoke tools that allow us to be a lot more efficient and effective, and therefore create greater value at lower cost, which is obviously important in a business context. And then we have this idea like tool chains and tool integration. So we need to use tools that that are well defined but can be reconfigured at will depending on changing circumstances, new challenges, and obviously COVID is a great illustrator of the things that we could never anticipate but we need to react to. And then we try to have this idea of a sort of plug and play content. So content that can be utilized in many different contexts. It can be used in many different channels, but it can also be put together on the fly, on demand, and it works very, very well in any sort of context, in any sort of combination. And then I guess finally we have this idea of possibly one of the more challenging areas is this composite product idea. So clouds are built of many different products. You may end up with one solution, but it might be composed of hundreds of different actual small products from many different creators, not just internally but externally. And this is also illustrated in additive manufacturing or 3D printing, where you can simply take patterns and create new products from them, adding as much of your own creation as is required.
That's a great explanation.
Very nice. Yeah, and it's funny you brought up 3D printing. I was just looking at a 3D chocolate printer before I got on. I was like, that's what I need. That's got nothing to do with content, but it makes chocolate in any shape. So that would be awesome.
There's nothing wrong with chocolate.
Right. Agreed. No, that was a really, really good list. So I'm curious, you talked a little bit about how we work with other teams. And I know that there's a lot of folks out there that might be technical writers, or there might be marketers, there might be DevOps, they might be IT. So can you talk to our audience a little bit about how technical writers or technical communication folks can collaborate with and learn from other teams?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to focus on software development, but the idea of DevOps or Agile in software sort of provides a good example of how this can work. So large teams collaborate together, working on each other's strengths, often splitting tasks between each other in a sort of non-traditional way to try and build a much more innovative and sort of vital product. And I think as content creators, we need to create value, and part of what we can do is sort of this idea of sort of a bee pollinating different parts of the business. We have a unique role in that, I think, and I think it can not only improve the content that we create, but obviously improves our position within companies as a value entity or value generating entity.
And do you think that changed from the past and will change in the future, or is that just kind of how it is across the board?
No, I think this is actually quite unusual. I think often technical writers have been a sort of separate function. They've existed in their own little world. They've not really necessarily been sharing processes. The collaboration is usually quite well defined. But I mean, the future is so much more complicated. Technical writers may be technical, but they're not experts. So clearly they need to talk with people who are experts, but also they have to understand the whole end-to-end business. So it's not just simply working with the people who create products, but the people who deploy or integrate products. And obviously, most importantly, talking with the actual user or the customer, and having these sort of feedback channels, which allow us to improve what we're doing and how we're doing it.
It seems like there's a complication factor in here, right? That there's some types of content that's going to be more complicated to create and assemble and to manage and make sure that we put it together in meaningful ways that are useful to people. But it also seems like the humans who create that content are technical writers, and we double down on our humanness. And sometimes all these changes and these all these moving parts introduce that complication thing that our human brains don't like. So we double down on our value is really that we write well, and that and I think you're making an argument that some of us, at least, the value can be more than that we can actually move our organizations forward by taking the knowledge that we have about information management, and it's more than just writing.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're technically illiterate, you can't counterbalance that by being a cunning linguist, by being just a good writer. You have to add something a lot more than this base capability. And the world is getting ever more technical, so it doesn't really matter whether you're making a widget or you're involved in the most complex cloud applications. Everything is going to get much more difficult, much more complicated, much more removed. And I think we have to get used to the idea that the world is going to be software defined. So everything we do and all interactions are going to be mediated by software. And we got to understand how that's going to apply, not just to the software industry, but to almost everything that actually will still exist in, say, 20 years' time.
That's really interesting too, because I love the cunning linguist comment, because I think it is something that people are proud of, and with great practice, being wordsmiths, I appreciate great writing, but I also know that tools are starting to help other people who aren't that great of writers sound like better writers because the tools are able to augment the writer's skills. So I think you're onto something about us differentiating ourselves in a different way. Don't try to hang on to your mastery of the vocabulary as your sole value proposition. Is that what you're also trying to get at?
Absolutely. I mean, things like natural language generation tools can generate very convincing content, and that can't be all that we are. We won't be able to compete. You know, we want to go on holidays, we want to have lunches, we want to do sociable things, but actually machines don't care about any of that, and they can generate relatively good content even now, and clearly in the future they're just going to get better and better at it. So we have to offer a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think beyond that, there's a side of it where if we are cunning linguists, we might be using words that machines are not going to understand, or they're not going to be predicting. And so the idea of I'm a very concise writer, and my very concise writing style works really, really well for machines. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm a good writer for everybody, right? There are some people that would look at my writing style and say, no, it's too boring. But it works well for machines, whereas somebody might be very prolific in writing using big flowery language, but that wouldn't work so well for machines. So I think there's both sides. There's the machine is able to create really good writing, and we have to be very careful about what we input into the machine, right?
I've taken a master class with David Sedaris, who is a popular culture writer, right? He writes fiction and partial truths about his life, and he uses a great command of language to tell the stories in exciting and interesting ways. And while it really is rewarding for my brain, I don't know that natural language processing is going to get the innuendo that he hides inside those words in a way that would be meaningful. And so, I can see why writers who are proud of their prowess want to hang on to it, and I encourage them to do so. But I don't think we should be afraid of using tools to make us better. I mean, if we need to be succinct, for example, David Sedaris would tell the short version of the story. If that's your goal, don't blabber on about it. It's nice that you want to be funny, but just be direct.
Right. Do you have any examples by chance of, Rob, of just how sort of our traditional way of tech writing might not work today?
Well, I think in the sort of traditional tech writer who lives in a sort of cubbyhole, separate from everyone he's actually working with, physically separate as well as sort of process separate, is good illustrators. So we have this sort of reverence for the past in the sort of traditional technical writing role, that we like our old tools, we like our old processes, and we like our old deliverables. And if we continue to that, they will become ever more irrelevant. I mean, partly because the channels have changed, but the way of writing and the need for that content to work differently means that the old ways simply are not good enough anymore. We have to think about how the content has to actually work with other content, how it can be used with content from different sources, with different providers, from different companies, because actually, especially with composite products, we're going to have to be able to build our content as we build our products as well.
That's a great point. I mean, I'm a mashup artist, which means that I'm a DJ in my bedroom now, because there's no nightclub I need to be exposed myself to, and nobody would be dancing even if they were. But I take products, voice products, and I recombine them to make a different version of a song. And I need to be able to do it from disparate sources. In other words, I'm taking one person's voice who works for a specific band or group who has a contract with a specific record company or media outlet who lives and follows certain laws. And I'm taking that and combining it with a totally different voice from a different band, from a different record company that might live in a different country with different regulations and laws about how I can use those products, but I'm putting them together and making it a new product. And what I hear you talking about a lot, Rob, is that is kind of the trend. And that our information, when it's locked up in a silo inside of our own company and it's not remixable with other products, it makes it really less compelling for people to be able to utilize it. And so I guess my question to you is, first, before we go to the next question, it seems like, Megan, this is the kind of thing that your software company tries to do, bring together content from different places and put it in one experience so that the user doesn't have to jump around through all the hoops. Can you tell us a little bit about Zoomin software and how that relates to this part of the talk?
Yeah, absolutely. So what Zoomin does is we help your customers find the answers they need while empowering agents to provide the support that they need to your customers. And so we bring in content from multiple sources and we pull it together and then push it out to multiple customer touch points with a unified and personalized experience for your customers, for your agents, really to help support self-service for both.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's increasingly important. Customer service representatives are asked to basically pull miraculous answers out of the hat sometimes because they never know what question we're going to call and ask about. And the ability to have everything in one place, I think, is key to that. So, Rob, in our planning call before today's show, you mentioned something that I think got Megan's attention, and that was that you said that technical communicators need to also become good content citizens. What did you mean by content citizenship, I think is the word that you used, and why do you feel like that's important?
The idea of this sort of form of citizenship is content creators have to think outside the company that they're actually working for. They have to think in a bigger, as part of a much bigger community. They have to have rules and sort of good practice guidelines and work collaboratively to develop how we actually communicate sort of generally, because, as I said before, we're not just going to be building single products made out of by a single manufacturer. We're going to be putting these products together in very diverse forms on the fly. So we have to have this sort of collaborative approach to making the right information available in the right formats in the right way. And obviously this sort of a collective understanding of the problem and the solution has to be sort of created and accepted by a sort of a good content citizen. And it's also the idea that you should be looking at serving the community, not simply one company. So it's the idea that community value is actually greater than the value you should place on simply serving the specific needs of the company you happen to work for, because the real value is not just on the content that you're developing in the context of your company, but actually the value it's going to have in a sort of wider world and when it's integrated with other content. And then also this idea that content citizens won't just be natural people, they'll also be AI entities as well. We have to get to the idea that we're going to work with robots effectively, and this is going to be entirely normal, and it means we have to work in obviously a slightly different way than we would with sort of real people.
Yeah, that's it's really interesting. I do love that. I love that phrasing, the good content citizen. And what I gathered from it is that being a good content citizen today is kind of the foundation of how we work today, but in the future it might mean something a little bit different, but ultimately we're laying the same foundation. And so we talked about the idea of predicting what's going to happen in the future, how we're going to be operating in the future, what the content's going to look like in the future. I think about things like automated cars that now we don't have to do anything, and so our eyeballs and our hands are free to consume content, right? So we think about these crazy things that might come down the pike, and I think what you were suggesting was that we shouldn't necessarily try to predict all of the various situations that could come up, but that we should make it possible to create a personalized experience no matter what comes our way. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the past we've had this sort of privilege of being able to create content for known purposes and known channels. So for instance, you create it for PDF, you might have embraced HTML and have a website, but still it's extremely known, we understand, and we have the sort of capability to define the process and actually the outcome. And we basically say, this is what we have. And yes, we may listen to sort of user or customer representations about the quality or usefulness, but we're sort of quite used to saying this is how it is. And it's, in a sense, classic printing philosophy that we define everything about the process, and we define what the sort of deliverables are. But I think if we accept that everything has to be a service, so it's not just the software, it's not just a delivery of anything. Content clearly has to be a service as well. So we have to get used to the idea that you can't just say to people, we have a website, go and look at it, hopefully find out what you need, understand its relevance, understand how it actually interworks with all the other parts of the thing that we've just delivered to you, because that, at the moment, that's effectively what we do. If you buy a cloud system, you're going to have maybe the products of 300 different software houses, and we basically say to them, well, just go and sort of read our website. And clearly that's not as a service. So we've got to get to the idea of creating a content service, and this will entirely change both how we work and how we actually see the content and our value in this relationship.
I think that self-service title sometimes gets misused as, we'll just chuck it all over here and then you'll go find it on your own, which it still alienates this thing that all of our viewers are talking about. In fact, in the questions section, we've had people asking, is the customer experience still relevant? So I'm going to take off on that and ask you this question. You've warned in the past that personalization efforts can even alienate those that we intend to serve. And you're not arguing that we should provide the better customer experience, but you are saying that there are opportunities to get it wrong. Talk a little bit about that. How can we avoid, what are the things that could cause us to get personalization wrong, in your view?
Well, I mean, there's no question that AI, data mining, big data and analytics are big enablers for sort of this granular personalization. But the problem is they obviously rely on the obtaining, taking, using, and warehousing of personal data, and this is really a trust question, and partly because I think we haven't actually explained this very well. So you get these horrible pop-ups that say, we're going to do things with your data, and do you accept it, or do you have to read a 97-page legal explanation of all the processes? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
No, you don't get the content.
Yeah, exactly. It's not really a choice. It's certainly not an informed choice, because most people, even if they did read the statements, would not really understand what was going on, because they're often written in a way that is for legal compliance and not for explanation. So part of the issue is that I think we failed to explain why we want to use big data and analytics, but there is this real trust question. And I think users who don't trust the organization will stop using their products. As simple as that. There will be choice.
Absolutely. There's a paradox here that works around trust, really. So we want to trust our organizations to be able to give them our personal information. So we want data privacy from organizations. At the same time, we really trust content that's highly relevant to us, highly personalized. And in order for us to do that from a content delivery standpoint, we need the data. And so there's this paradox between data privacy and this need consumers have for really, really personalized content.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's a strange paradox, because obviously both can't necessarily coexist easily. But I think, I mean, there's a sort of implicit recognition of this with sort of app-based sort of web experience, that we do give trust on a limited basis to apps to do things that we perhaps wouldn't do if we simply searched for it in a search engine, clicked on a link, and then had to provide lots of information. We sort of create these sort of small trust environments. But I think the future is also more about people effectively will have a personal app which funnels content they're interested in, and they will define the terms of service, not the person providing the information. So they will say, we will accept these things and nothing else. And I think the this whole sort of empowerment is probably going to be one of the sort of next great leap forwards in sort of web experience. And I think that's something also we have to understand, that we can't really give a zero choice. Either do what we say or you don't get the service. So everything as a service means the person receiving the service defines the service, and we don't get to do that. And we have to think about content in that environment, not in the environment that we have now.
Rob,
that's really interesting.
We've got over 400 people that signed up for today's show, and we have lots of questions to try to tackle, but I wanted to make sure that we made it through what we promised to talk about first. So before we jump into the extra questions that are coming in from the audience, what advice do you have for technical communicators in order to prepare them for the future? Can you give us like 3 practical?
Yeah, I mean, I keep this really simple. So you must be proactive about collaboration. I mean, collaboration is absolutely the key to developing good content. So you must enable collaboration by processes. You must understand processes, make sure they're working efficiently, and have processes that you can actually well define, move around, change, to actually improve the product at the end of it, the sort of value. And then obviously, I mean, we can't roll back reality, so we have to embrace robots, automation, artificial intelligence, machine-mediated user experience. All these things are inevitable, so we have
not going anywhere.
Yeah, they're our friends, so we have to treat them as friends, and we have to be able to work with them, understand how they work, and also get out of them the things that we actually want.
Nice.
And then I would guess the last one would be everything that can be automated should be automated. So we need to reduce cost and increase value. So that makes no sense. If we can automate a task, then we should automate it. We should do, as everything else is doing as well. We need to sort of take out the laborious, in a sense, unproductive tasks and give them to machines, etc., to do, because they're very, very good at this sort of thing.
That's a really good summary, and I know Megan wants to ask you one more question. I'm going to start looking for the questions from the audience, and we'll queue them up.
I was actually going to bring up one from the audience because it was super relevant to what you just talked about. So somebody asked about, they said to help practice good content citizenship, which they said sharing across the world, don't we need standards? And they said, what standards do you see emerging?
As simple as possible, hopefully. I like the
thinking, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the problem with standards tend to get very complicated, and I think that is what we need to avoid. So we need to embrace simplicity. We need to see content as content, but we shouldn't have to worry too much about what we want to do with it after it. We shouldn't try to format for things that we can never know. We should keep the content simple and worry about how we do the transforms later. And that means we can, interwork. So it's not about really standardizing solutions, but it's actually trying to separate content from all the other things that we want to do later in the future. And that means we have the sort of maximum usability for the content, and we can actually transform it and use it in so many different ways if we don't try to think about it when we're actually creating the content itself.
So I think what you're saying is don't worry about standardizing format, like what should be bolded and what should be pink, but really simplify the content coming in, have some basic standards and some simple standards coming in so that your tool can then determine what to do with it in a more personalized way, which really aligns with our last talk show, Scott. I mean, it's really exactly the same message that we got from Val.
For those of you who didn't get a chance to see it, you can search brighttalk.com or look in a future email from the Content Wrangler, and you'll get a recommendation to watch this recorded video of Val Swisher talking about the personalization paradox, in which she argues that in order to provide an individualized experience, we have to standardize what we do in order for the machines to deliver the right piece to the right person for the right experience, which is very complicated, but I'll let you tackle the last question, Megan, and then I'll take some questions from the audience.
I think, honestly, I think the questions from the audience are so interesting. So I suggest we jump right into that, and then we can come back to it if needed.
In the interest of time, Rob, how do you break down content silos? And my question to you, which I'm altering, is, or should we be bothering with breaking them down at all? What is the issue with silos?
silos contain value. I mean, if you have silos, it's very hard for different parts of an organization to firstly know what's in those silos and then, of course, to use it. So, I mean, silos are, and silos also tend to represent a siloed way of working as well. So it's not just about the existence of the silo, it's why the silo exists. It tends to say that actually little parts of the organization are doing their own thing and not thinking collectively, and not thinking as not just content citizens, but citizens of a company or organization.
If we have content as a service, wouldn't we maybe aim to connect the silos and try to exchange the information once we have a standardized approach to doing that? Wouldn't that maybe be better than trying to kill them all off?
Yeah, I mean, as long as there's interoperability. I mean, a database, mechanics are usually pretty complicated, but I think it's not the existence of the silos is the problem. It's why the silos exist. So I think it's sort of an irrelevancy if there's many silos. There's inevitably there's not going to be one single database. Obviously, it's just not practical.
Silos are an interesting topic. I once did some research. There's actually a scientific reason for silos, or not reason for, but a benefit to silos, which is that having people in smaller groups actually helps with change management. It helps people to buy into really large, complex ideas. And so having silos can be beneficial, but you have to have bridges between the silos in order to have information flow from one to the other so that they have the opportunity to buy into those big, complex ideas.
Correct.
Interesting topic.
Deborah wants to ask Rob if he believes that it might behoove a new generation of tech writers to educate their channel peers and engineering partners on how to work with them, the tech writers. What do you think about that?
I think everyone needs to educate each other, because I think often tech writers are sort of fail because they don't truly understand the value that other people can bring to what they're doing. Right. And obviously other people don't understand necessarily what the role of tech writers is. So I think often tech writers have to take much more responsibility in both educating others about what they do, but also understanding what the value of quite diverse people within an organization can be, because they have very useful and very valuable knowledge, but tech writers certainly
you hit on that. You hit on the right word, I think, which is value. I think we've spent far too much time trying to prove why technical writers should exist, which is a bullshit thing to be talking about. We should instead, be focused on what value, when you pay as an owner of a company for a department of technical communicators, you're paying for the capability that they can deliver you, the value. It's not really whether the technical communicators have value. Of course, all your employees should have value, right? But whether the work they do contributes to the goal of the organization, which I know I hear that in your complaints, that you're basically arguing, let's show the value that we have so we can make our organizations less likely to be on the chopping block. Am I putting words in your mouth? It just seems like that's the warning, is that we should get with the program so that we can be heightened to the awareness of the importance of that value that we provide, that's not always clear to people who don't understand what it is that we do.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's a very strong argument that in the future that content and the content communication will be actually more valuable than the product itself, because it will be the differentiator between many similar things. So if you can make something easier, better to use, the experience better, then you add an immense value to the whole thing. But you have to, I think tech writers have to be better at understanding this economic reality and then sort of measuring themselves against that, and not against the false things about how many documents they create, how many errors they find, etc.
Right.
Someone asked a highly relevant question around value, which is the value that technical writers contribute, is it being advocates for your end users, or is it something different than that?
It can be, and it depends obviously on the organization. End user advocacy is obviously really important in some organizations, but it can't just be limited to that. Even in the organizations where it's important, I think technical writers or technical communicators or content creators in a sort of tech environment, their job is to sort of help everyone communicate better and sort of find value in so many different places. It can be process efficiency, it can be the way that people interact, improving training for new people joining the company. There's so many different sort of roles that content creators can have, and we shouldn't sort of limit ourselves just to one or two of them. It can be all of them and any of them, and a sort of a rich mix that will prove, what the value we can bring.
Well said.
Ant wants to know if post-COVID, we might see a greater number of smaller enterprises. He says ones that maybe can't afford to invest in machine support and will or should be turning to freelancers or small numbers of in-house writers and editors. Do you see that, or do you see the machine support, the augmentation made possible by machine learning, the price going down because they can scale up and they make tools accessible to the average writer, not just to major enterprises?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest impact of COVID will be all the companies who were sort of saying we don't really need to digitalize, we don't need to worry about this quite now, are all reconsidering and going, actually, now we definitely need to do that, because if this happens again or something similar, then we don't want to be in the same position as we are now. So I think actually change will be quicker and more devastating to sort of traditional technical writing realities, and we've got to embrace them and get on top of them.
Do you feel like the description of technical writer needs to be decoupled or separated from the technical people who write code? Seems like the words get they get mushed in together, especially when we also borrow from each other. We borrowed content reuse or transclusion from object-oriented programming, and now we're borrowing the agile development methods that they use, and we're calling ourselves agile tech writers, when in effect, it's kind of blurring the lines, and maybe that makes it more challenging. What's your thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, sort of words obviously mean something, but I mean, I think technical writers, technical content, whatever we want to call ourselves, have to follow the realities of what's happening. We have to follow the sort of technical changes, the method of production, whatever. Obviously, it depends in which industry. We have to be realistic about that, and we have to, if a name is what it takes to make ourselves more relevant, that's one thing. But obviously, in reality, it's finding our new place in the emerging organizations. That's the key. So it's not so much the name, but exactly how we fit in, and certainly siloing ourselves and processes that we want to use from the rest of the organization is probably the worst way of doing it.
We've also had some talks in our pre-call, you and I and Megan, about some typical, I don't want to call them complaints, let's just say expressions of discontent from some technical communicators. For example, there are some people who have never moved from unstructured to structured content, and for whatever reasons, they double down on, I don't want to do this, and I hate this, and it's stupid, and when will it go away? Isn't that the wrong way to look at it? Is there a place for structured content where it needs to be, and unstructured content where maybe it doesn't need to be as structured? And is there a place for data, even if people who don't like to do it exist?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, in my article, I take a very strong sort of a view of data, but that's merely for sort of creating an argument. And obviously, data has a place, and it can be extremely useful in the right organization.
Your article definitely sparked interest.
Absolutely, and it was intended to. So that was not an assessment of my view that we should destroy data, we should abandon it. That's clearly not the case. And yeah, of course, content can be in many different forms, and in the right place, it can be the right form, and that's the key. Understanding what's needed at the time and place, and then defining how you're going to do your content processes after that. But you shouldn't bring the process to the thing. You should understand what's needed and then bring the process in afterwards, of course.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest point. I think there are teams where data is not going to be an option. It just isn't, because it is too technical and complicated for them. There's going to be other teams where they want to do docs as code, right? They don't want to deal with data because it's kind of not complicated enough. And so you need to find the right path for you, which then creates this need to be able to pull content from multiple sources in multiple formats and to be able to standardize it, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to create a really disparate content experience for your customers, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree completely.
We also talked a little bit about how delivering that content to people and allowing them to configure their own experience is really something that you're passionate about that I think Megan and I share with you. For example, Rob, we talked a little bit about Airbnb and my experience trying to coordinate a trip with other people before COVID-19, and that the fact that Airbnb repurposed all of its content, which it served up to me as an individual searcher of the website, and it said, okay, Scott, here are the houses that meet your requirements. And Airbnb allows you, for people who haven't used it, to rent a property that is owned by somebody else, and they're able to rent out part of their property to you. And in order to do that, if you want to share your trip adventure with another person, you need to build your own collection. And Airbnb allows me to repurpose the information that they're promoting to me in an attempt to convert me from a prospect to a customer. But they allow me to make a little collection, and then share that collection with the person I want to travel with. Isn't that really where the future is for our content? Shouldn't we be creating these small little pieces that can then be recombined by other people so that they can say, wow, they provided me with a great, valuable experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always say your sort of content ecosystem should be like Tinder for content, both in the sense that Tinder creates a beautiful user experience. It does what it needs to do in a very beautiful and very simple way, but also content itself should want to connect. It should, I call it valency, you know, it's same in sort of atomic valency, but your content should be able to be redefined and connect with other content in a very easy way, and dynamically, you know, as required in almost any combination. And we'll never be able to define that as content creators. That's for the user. That's going to be the essence of their user experience and their requirements.
And for those people who have been married happily as long as Tinder's been around, therefore haven't used Tinder, we can use the experience of Pandora or Netflix. Airbnb, right?
Yeah.
Netflix, yes.
And I think all those are also experiences that you argued, Rob, are becoming ingrained in the way that people expect content to work. And so when you have an experience with one of these apps, whatever they are, dating, entertainment, shopping for houses, your experience travels with you in your memory. And so when you go to experience some technical content, which, by the way, no one's thinking of as technical content, they're thinking of, I have a problem I need to answer. If you could serve that content up in a way that's familiar, that they can navigate in the same way they would Pandora or Netflix, and that could be as useful as Tinder or some other service can be, isn't that really where the future value that we have is held?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a legitimate expectation. We want things as services. We don't want to do too much work for them. We want them as we want them, and we want them to make it as easy as possible to do the thing that we want to do. And the fact that we don't expect that from, say, technical content or help content is, I think, a lag, but a lag that won't exist for too long. So I think these are quite legitimate expectations from users to want easy answers, easy solutions to their problems.
I want the easy button, but it's not always there within reach. And I think if it could be, I would be much happier. So thank you for sharing that. Thanks for joining us today. Wow, we had tons of questions from the audience. Thank you for submitting them. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but we'll queue them all up and we'll share them with Rob. Maybe they'll be fodder for an upcoming blog post, because you know he's got something to say about the future of communication that we want to hear about. And thanks for coming today. Megan, why don't you, excuse me, tell them how to rate the program today, and then I'll close out the show.
Yeah, absolutely. So before you guys sign off, we'd love to know what you thought of it. So go ahead and hit the Rate This tab located in your webinar viewing panel to give us a 1 to 5 star rating, and definitely leave any comments you'd like about today's show. If you have specific questions that you want answered and you didn't leave your name, then definitely reach out to us and we'll make sure we get back to you.
And don't forget to check the attachments and links section, where there's some information available from Rob, including the blog post that spawned this conversation today, and some information from our sponsor, Zoom and Software. And be on the lookout for an invitation to Megan and I's next show, which will take place on August the 18th. And we'll feature a chat with Karen Walker, who's an expert who's going to talk to us about what it takes to scale an organization. So thanks for joining us today. Until we see you again another time, be safe, be happy, be well, keep doing good work, and we'll see you on another Content Advantage show in the future. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Ensure your customers find the answers they need with Zoomin. Bring together product content from all teams and sources to deliver a unified, personalized content experience. Check us out at www.zoomansoftware.com.